You don't see anybody, you don't hear any cars, you don't see anything, and most of the places have just been closed.
Way more people are dying in this country than being born.
A country that is closing up kindergartens and housing cares are increasing.
And if nothing changes, Japan could eventually just not exist.
If you kind of extrapolate on the numbers, it's going to happen.
When you actually look at these numbers, you see why they say that Japan could disappear.
Schools are shutting down.
Elementary schools, even junior high schools have been shut down. 1, 2, 3, 4 kids in a class.
On the right is a high school that has even shut down in the past 10 years.
It starts with the small towns and cities.
Towns will die, cities will die.
The gap between deaths and births is getting bigger.
In Japan, every city is going down.
Japan's population fell by more than 500,000 people last year. Imagine if that happens every year.
So what happens when you have so many people leaving? What does that mean for infrastructure, for public services, hospitals, schools?
And just look at this chart which shows Japan's population projected decline. The country will go from being the 11th most populous country in the world to one day there will be less people in Japan than the state of New Jersey.
Only when Elon Musk tweeted, Japan went ballistic and the government just kind of freaked out.
Elon Musk is warning Japan will cease to exist.
This is such a common sight. You have so many abandoned stores like this across the city.
I'm visiting abandoned towns and interviewing government officials.
We are going to reduce the people going out.
Japan has a huge elderly population and it's home to the longest living people.
This is what a city hall looks like when over a third of your population is over the age of 65.
Many young Japanese today don't want to get married or have babies.
Long working hours, you don't meet anybody, there's no romance.
So what happens when a town like this just completely ceases to exist?
And is a smaller population actually a problem? Well, yes.
I see depopulation as a problem.
Decreasing the birth rate means decreasing the number of labor population.
Shrinking labor force has significant consequences. GDP will decline even more.
In addition to shrinking the economy, it puts a massive strain on the country.
If labor population decreases, you have to support elderly people, so the burden gets bigger and bigger.
This is one elementary school, and this is kind of an example of what happens when we don't find kind of reason or reuse purpose for elementary schools.
Jeff is a father of 2 living in Hakone. It's only about an hour or so outside of Tokyo, but it couldn't feel more different than one of the world's most crowded cities.
About 10 years ago, this elementary school shut down completely because there weren't enough students.
A lot of those children's clothes have also just kind of been shut down or combined as well.
A kid growing up here might have more elderly friends than friends their own age.
You have empty classrooms, and what kind of an interesting initiative my school took is the elementary school is 4 floors. They moved all the kids up to the top 3 floors because there were so many empty classrooms, and they used the first floor as kind of a community space for kind of the elderly in the neighborhood.
The kids in this neighborhood that would normally be zoned for this school now have to go to another one, and in some cases that could mean a 45-minute drive.
Finding kindergartens and preschools is quite a challenge for a lot of adults as well. It would have been nice to have kind of a bigger community, more kids to play around with.
It's so crazy growing up myself in the west coast of the United States. There's always more population. There's always new schools being built, new homes being built. So the idea of a community, a school, an elementary school that just didn't have enough students to the point where it had to completely shut down, it's crazy.
Jeff is an exception. See, most people in Japan are moving to bigger cities for more opportunities.
Tokyo is a wonderful place, but as you can imagine, it's really busy. Not a lot of green. I wanted to kind of expose them to more nature, kind of less structures.
A new initiative will pay parents more than $7,000 per kid to leave Tokyo.
Especially kind of the transformation and kind of work styles for a lot of people. A lot of it can be done in the office. And then commute times in Japan, it's not unusual to be an hour and a half, one-way commute time.
But the truth is, it's like the chicken or the egg. See, if a town has less people and activities, you don't want to move there. And if people aren't moving there, well, it'll only get more and more isolated.
What's really common is you'll have people here in the 60s who invested into raising their kids, owning a home in a place in kind of the suburbs. But the kids, understandably in their 20s and 30s, will want to move out to the big city, establish their own lives, and then don't feel obliged or want to come back. And then that's where where kind of the abandoned homes problems comes in.
You end up having towns with a lot of elderly people.
In a restaurant like this, you won't see any young workers. In fact, you'll see much older employees.
Another thing I noticed is many abandoned homes. In fact, Japan has millions of them.
So you can see, I mean, a lot of these places have signs. They were businesses, they were open for business. And now all you see is either they're closed or they're abandoned entirely.
With young people moving to cities for better jobs, there's a huge amount of homes just sitting empty with no one wanting to buy or live in them.
They're on the rise. There are many. There are government initiatives to create what are called kind of abandoned home banks where they can be registered. But one of the big challenges these local administrations for town offices or city offices have is, number one, finding who actually owns them. So a lot of times, even if they are passed away, finding the children or who actually has the rights to those homes is also very difficult. A closed business, a business, that also just has kind of a negatively compounding effect in terms of revitalization or the community spirit.
I meet a local agent who's trying to revitalize the town and encouraging people to open up a business.
What she's done, she's taken a lot of kind of abandoned houses and kind of introduced businesses.
So why is Japan's birth rate decline so dramatic?
I'm in my 40s now. Our fathers kind of built Japan Inc. So they were gone after we fell asleep, so we wouldn't see them at all. They had the kind of samurai Bushido spirit that we're fighting for the company, and that has slowly changed. I think that's our generation now is kind of a generation that kind of missed out on that relationship, maybe, is trying to make up for that.
People saw their parents overworked, sacrificing a lot to work and raise a family, but the new generation is rebelling against that.
It's a big economic investment that I think even Japanese people are more interested in maybe spending on themselves, just a little bit more than back in the day.
Japan wants to encourage people to have babies, so they're giving money to new moms, but many experts say that it's a losing strategy. And to really fix this problem, it will need to allow more immigrants to come and also accelerate robots in the workplace. But more on that later. I meet a professor outside of Tokyo to understand what this all means for Japan's future.
Shrinking population, shrinking labor force, and aging population has negative impact on both sides of the economy. On the demand side of the economy, so it means consumption, households, more elderly people, it means less consumption.
Japan was the second largest economy in the world, but it was surpassed by China about 10 years ago. But to stay a large economy, it will need to produce goods and services, and people here need to spend money.
They already have houses, they no need to change their cars, they married already, so the expenditures and the expenses on consumption is much lower.
But the trend of disappearing towns is nothing new. In fact, I'm taking a train to Wakayama. It's outside of Osaka. The population here has been declining for almost 30 years. I go to its city hall to understand just how bad the problem is here.
So I just input that data from the city hall, and this is really concerning. More people are dying than being born, and more people are moving out than are moving in. But what's really interesting when you crunch the numbers is you see that, yeah, it's nothing new. There are a lot more deaths than there are births. But the scary part here is that the gap between deaths and births is getting bigger. A simple chart like this, and it's no wonder why so many people are really concerned about the future of Japan. Over a third of the population here is over the age of 65, where you have such a high percentage of elders roaming around the city, not just going about their day-to-day, but many of them still working.
I'm here during an election season, and I meet a candidate who is hoping to attract more people to move here.
We are going to reduce the people going out.
University will get some young people from outside the city. Those young people will, I think, working in this city, so and lives in this city. Population will get growing.
During his interview, he said he's very optimistic. He wants Wakayama to thrive. He's excited about the upcoming colleges and universities. And he told me he thinks Wakayama is going to grow. The population is going to grow. And while that sounds great, that might be wishful thinking because the numbers don't lie. This is such a common sight. You have so many abandoned stores like this across the city. You can definitely tell that the infrastructure was built for way more people. It gives it this really weird, eerie sensation that it's somewhat of a ghost town. Just take a street like this. You have this is kind of an abandoned shop. Over here, I don't know what that was, but over here you have a brand new sandwich shop and it seems to be booming. It seems to be doing pretty well. There are people going in and out, but admittedly, it is kind of random and you wonder like, how a place like that can survive. It's about 3 o'clock on a Thursday and most of these shops are just completely vacant or shut down. This to me says it all. This to me says a lot about what's happening in this city, a lot about the economy, and this is the representation you see. Many elders and a declining population. You have to wonder how a place like this can stay open. It's an ice cream shop, they sell waffles, they sell ice cream. They're kind of off the beaten path, and when you don't have foot traffic, you don't make money. And when you don't make money, you can't stay in business. And when you can't stay in business, you leave. This restaurant behind me is only open for dinner from 6 to 9. That's 3 hours. Many of the businesses that do exist in the city are closed a lot of the times. I've seen coffee shops that are closed all day on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or a restaurant that's only open Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This is because you have a lack of demand. There's not a lot of customers. It's also hard to find people to work. So what other options do you have but to be open for a few hours here, a few hours there? It's become fairly common to take an abandoned building, demolish it, and then just put a parking lot here because there is more use to park cars there than for anything else. And what about the people who do stay here? I mean, they're the ones kind of fighting for its existence and its future. But even many of the young people I meet here tell me that they want to move. They want to go to Osaka. They want to go to Tokyo, where the big city is, where the action is.
I want to move to somewhere because actually I'm gonna change my job. I wanna be an illustrator.
So even though the population is going down here, he tells me that the coffee culture is getting quite popular.
And I meet a hotel and cafe owner who's also quite optimistic.
Our company mission is to revitalize this area.
Despite Japan being a rich country with a strong economy, it has a higher debt to GDP ratio than Venezuela or Lebanon. And this government debt is causing a bigger crisis to the low birth rate crisis. See, with fewer babies being born and more people getting old, the government has to spend a lot of money on pensions, healthcare, and social support, which makes it increase its debt.
Almost 1/3 of the Japanese government budget is for the social security.
Since there are fewer working folks to pay taxes, well, the government struggles to bring in enough money, and they'll have to decide, do they spend their money supporting the elderly or encouraging young families?
1/3 of the budget is going to elderly people. So if you don't have enough younger population, if you don't have enough working population, you don't have enough taxpayers to finance the government budget.
There's going to be a reckoning day for Japanese debt at some point. The debt to GDP ratio in Japan, there's no comparison around the world. There's only so long you can have the central bank buy up your own banknotes.
That will also endangering the future of the pension system in Japan, which is very serious.
It's kind of scary to think what that's going to look like, but to be able to navigate that economic turmoil that will have to come at some point is kind of, hopefully my kids will have the skills and abilities to kind of navigate that in the future.
For Japan to be saved, there are 3 changes that could happen. The first is to increase the number of women having babies in Japan. And to do this, they need to give more incentives, but a lot of those efforts are just not working.
50,000 Japanese yen to give birth to one child is about equivalent of maybe $4,000. They should be paying pregnant women and make it a more helpful and supporting environment.
They're doing what they can do. There's a certain line in terms of what responsibility they have, what kind of pressure they can give it to the individual. They can incentivize them through economic bonuses, but how much does a couple $100s do for a family over 20 years?
The second one is to allow more immigrants. So about 2% of Japan's population are immigrants. But compare that to the US, where around 14% of the population are immigrants, and Germany, which is 17%.
Immigration is the way to handle more jobs than there is for people.
So many people gonna be against allowing so many immigration because Japanese is, so monoculture.
It's not very common to see foreigners. There are several reasons behind it. So one reason is social reason, cultural reasons. Japan used to be very closed country toward foreigners.
People are very worried about integration in the Japanese society, more assimilation rather than kind of an embrace of different cultures.
Japan is easing some of its restrictions and actually giving out more visas for high-skilled workers to move here. But despite these initiatives, the country still remains very isolated from new cultures.
It's a mentality, geographically as well. We're not connected to any other country, so there's no easy way to get in or out of Japan.
The third solution is to increase road robots and have them take on more jobs.
One solution to population decreasing is, I think it's robot or using artificial intelligence.
By increasing robots into society, it will make Japan more efficient. So imagine robots in the service industry or helping take care of the elderly or in industrial automation. Whatever happens, the government will need to take drastic action.
We need reforms. For example, reforms regarding the working population, increasing the retirement age, bringing more females as a labor force, accepting more migrants from other countries and so on. If you let the economy shrink, so it means that you will have a small economy that majority of your population are retired. And this small portion of younger generation, they wouldn't tolerate to pay for these huge social security pension and so on.
But will Japan turn into a poor country?
Government wouldn't have enough budget for developing infrastructure, paying for the education, for military purpose and so on.
Back in Wakayama, I can't stop thinking about how a story like this ends.
You have to wonder what a city like Wakayama looks like in 10 years or maybe even 5 years when you have such a large percentage that are graying, that are old, that are just not living much longer. So far, it's apparent that 12 people left the town, 6 people died. The government data here is really quite thorough. They even put on the front page there was a 2.1% increase in garbage being collected, which if you think about it, is kind of an exciting sign because you need people to create garbage.
The population declining, Japan needs to preserve a lot of its culture. I don't know how the government's going to do it.
Will drastic changes be made?
What happens to these abandoned homes?
Or will Japan just one day completely cease to exist?
Without young people moving here, without new blood, without new babies, what is a society? What is a city? Is it just return back to nature?